We're going to bring you live coverage of the House here on C-SPAN, but over on C-SPAN 3, Kathleen Sebelius before the Energy and Commerce Committee saying she is responsible, she is accountable for the website and promising that it will be up and running November 30th. Thanks for watching today. See you tomorrow.
Honorable Kevin Cramer to act as Speaker Pro Tempore on this day. Signed, John A. Boehner, Speaker of the House of Representatives.
Pursuant to the order of the House of January for morning hour debate. The chair will alternate recognition between the parties, with each party limited to 1 hour, and each member other than the majority and minority leaders and the minority whip limited to 5 minutes each. But in no event shall debate continue beyond 11:50 a.m. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Williams, for 5 minutes.
Speaker, thank you. Mr. Speaker, it is a sad day in America when Army Secretary John McHugh says that in today's fiscal environment, the best-case scenario for our military's budget is treacherous. Army Chief of Staff Ray Odierno said budget cuts hamper the military's ability to train its own troops. While there is waste and overlap in every federal agency, the Pentagon's budget not excluded, there is much to be said for Congress doing its primary job of governing, passing a budget. For the last 4 years, we've seen the constraints that continuing resolution after continuing resolution has placed on our military. Earlier this year, we saw the rigid requirements that harmed the Department of Defense when President Obama's sequester took place. Before these cuts, the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office said our defense program was already underfunded by 5%, with modernization underfunded by 10%. Thankfully, Congress took quick action that allowed the DoD to operate under a budget in order to meet all of their fiscal requirements and have more flexibility as they absorb the across-the-board sequester cuts. General Odierno revealed this week that just 2 Army brigades are combat-ready and training has come to a halt. This is a terrifying reality, given that only 2 months ago, President Obama addressed Congress and the public asking for support for a military attack on Syria. We absolutely cannot send our troops who are not trained, not equipped, and not prepared into harm's way. Our military readiness should never, ever be threatened like this. As the world's superpower, our armed forces must be ready to deploy thousands of troops should the need arise. As the military continues finding ways to operate under current spending levels, it is also downsizing in Afghanistan and preparing for future programs with no certainty of any financial stability. Our nation has a serious financial problem. Our deficit is growing. Our spending is increasing, and it seems that in nearly every budget battle, our military is thrown in as a bargaining chip. This is not the American way, and it must become the thing of the past. Other government agencies have bloated budgets with wasteful overlapping programs, fraudulent spending, and blatant abuse of taxpayer dollars. All the while, our military budget is being stripped to its bare bones. Last time I checked, Mr. Speaker, we're still a nation at war. Now is not the time to gut essential programs for our warriors and their families. We owe it to our military to have them operate under a regular order, pass and conference our appropriation bills so our fighters can continue to be the best and the most prepared in the world. Texas' 25th District is home to Fort Hood, the Army's premier installation to train and deploy heavy forces and one of the largest military installations in the world. Fort Hood ranks highest in terms of future capability and can support and can sustain more than 50,000 soldiers and their families. I urge my colleagues in Congress to honor our commitment to these troops and put an end to the financial uncertainty in the military. Let's simply do just the right thing. May God bless our troops, God bless America, and always in God we trust. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the minority whip, the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Hoyer, for 5 minutes or as much time as he should require.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, budget conferees are now meeting, or will be meeting shortly, to negotiate a budget for the remainder of this fiscal year. And they have a real opportunity to look beyond that mission and lay the groundwork for a long-term solution to our deficits that is balanced and restores certainty to our economy. What we do not need is more gimmicks and partisan games, like we will have today, frankly. We're going to have a vote on the resolution which is disapproving of the raising of the debt limit. Everybody knows that's not a real vote, and almost everybody on this floor knows that if we pursued that policy, it would be damaging to America, to the military that was just brought up, and to our nation. And every Republican leader has said that not increasing the debt limit is an alternative that ought to be pursued. Yet we have this vote. That resolution has already been rejected by the Senate and stands no chance of surviving a presidential veto. It is, frankly, simply political cover and a waste of our time. The keys to any budget solution, Mr. Speaker, must be compromise and a seriousness of purpose. Americans want to see that seriousness, and they want to see much, much, much less of the political gamesmanship, some of which we'll practice today, unfortunately. Republicans and Democrats, I believe, in looking beyond a small fix and toward negotiating a long-term solution, will find that we actually agree on many things. We agree that gradual reforms are better than sudden ones. We agree that sequestration is not a sensible approach to achieving deficit savings. And let me say as an aside, no matter how many times it's said on this floor that the sequester is President Obama's policy, it will not make it fact. It is dead flat wrong. The sequester is incorporated in the Republican budget that was passed this House just some months ago. No Democrat voted for that budget because they believe the sequester, as the previous speaker said, but he voted for the budget which has implemented the sequester, is harming our national security and harming our domestic security and harming our economy and harming the growth of jobs. In fact, sequestration, which I point out to people starts with S, which stands for stupid, is a terrible approach that was never meant to come into practice. Many of us all agree that in replacing the sequester, we'll need to find savings through revenue policies and reforms to mandatory spending that can pay dividends for the budget and the economy in the future. The key to compromise, of course, is balance. Every American understands that. Every husband, every wife, every parent understands that compromise is essential within a family, within a business, within a community, and, yes, within a country. The key to compromise is balance, which is what both the Rivlin-Domenici and Bowles-Simpson Bipartisan Commission embraced as a framework for agreement. A balanced compromise is critical because Democrats and Republicans are going to have to work together to pass any agreement through both chambers and have it signed into law. Democrats are ready to make the tough decisions necessary to set our fiscal house in order. But we've made it clear that we will not allow the most vulnerable Americans to carry the burden of deficit reduction. And it is not necessary that they do so. Our goal remains a balanced approach to deficit reduction and an agreement that restores certainty to our economy. My Republican colleagues and friends said much about restoring certainty, particularly in the 2010 election. Unfortunately, for our economy, for our businesses, for our people, we have done anything but restore certainty. In fact, we have governed by crisis. 30 days, 90 days, 180 days, a year. Arbitrary deadlines put in place which brought the country to the brink of default and to the brink of closing down government. And in fact, of course, just recently, we did in fact shut down the government. Now, my Republican colleagues say we wanted that to happen on our side of the aisle. Ironically, 198 Democrats voted to open the government. That is to say, every Democrat that was voting on this floor voted to open government. And my colleagues who say they didn't want to shut down government, 144 of them voted to keep government shut down. Mr. Speaker, and 87 of them voted to open up government. So the American public is not fooled who wanted to shut down the government, but it was a bad policy and lent to uncertainty in our economy. Reaching an agreement only for this fiscal year, in addition, Mr. Speaker, will mean more left to do, more of sequester left to replace, and more confidence to instill. Mr. Speaker, I hope that conferees will take a broader view and send us a budget worthy of this nation, worthy of the nation it will serve, and one that reflects our priorities to grow our economy, create jobs, give opportunity to our people, ensure that our national security is protected, and that our nation's long-term competitiveness is enhanced. Mr. Speaker, that's what we ought to do. That's what the American people expect us to do. That's what the American people hope we will do. Let's warrant the faith and confidence of the American people by keeping faith with them and with our country. And I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Poe, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, is the administration aware of the actions that are taking place in the administration? Little history. Fast and furious. Quote, everyone knows the president did not know about this tactic until he heard about it through the news media. Quote, White House Press Secretary Jay Carney. So lower-level operatives were blamed, no accountability. Benghazi. 5 days after the attack, the administration still blamed it on a video. We learned later that the White House was told that this was a terrorist attack within 3 days of the attack. So when did the president find out this was a terrorist attack? In any event, no accountability. Video blamed. No one in the administration held accountable, and the killers have not been brought to justice. Department of Justice wiretapping of the Associated Press. Quote, other than press reports, we have no knowledge of any attempt by the Justice Department to seek phone records of the Associated Press. Once again, White House Press Secretary Jay Carney. Lower-level operatives were blamed, no accountability. IRS scandal, Jay Carney once again. The investigation was not a matter that should be conveyed to the president. Lower-level operatives blamed, no accountability. Obamacare website disaster. Secretary Sebelius claims the president was not aware of the website problems until the website was launched. Once again, lower-level operatives blamed, no accountability. NSA spying on foreign leaders. U.S. officials claim the president did not know about this. The president refuses to say whether he knew or not, but anyway, lower-level operatives officially blamed. NSA spying on Americans. The president claims he did not know the extent of the spying on Americans. Lower-level operatives blamed. No accountability. Mr. Speaker, exactly who is running the country? Lower-level operatives? Has the government gone wild? Is there a shadow government operating without the knowledge of the White House? Is the president out of tune with what's taking place in his own administration? Or is he aware of those actions? If the president was unaware of all of this, the White House needs to hold people accountable. Hold these lower-level operatives accountable for their actions, their improper actions, their bungling, their incompetence. The White House needs to fix this out-of-control government immediately. The White House needs to take responsibility for the actions of his administration and quit blaming others and lower-level operatives. That is the White House's responsibility. After all, to quote the constitutional law professor, the buck stops with me. And that's just the way it is. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. Blumenauer, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last night I was at National Airport awaiting Delta Flight 3395, 9:52 p.m. Shortly after 10 p.m., Janice Senwari, wife and 2 small children, emerged to be greeted by Captain Matt Zeller. They had been kept under wraps as they made their way from Afghanistan to the United States. There was just one television camera there to record this happy ending as Captain Zeller wrapped Janice in a big bear hug. It was a happy ending to a story with many ups and downs, all too familiar for those of us who have been working with the Special Immigrant Visa Program to try and secure the flight to safety from Iraq and Afghanistan for those foreign nationals who worked with Americans as drivers, as interpreters, as guides. Janice was an interpreter who saved the life of Captain Matt Zeller in a firefight. He, for 5 years, has been stuck in sort of a bureaucratic limbo as Captain Zeller dedicated his time and energy to secure the release of a man he referred to as his brother. Well, it happened. Despite the fact that there was a false start where Janice had been given the visa, sold his possessions, prepared his family, only to have it revoked at the last minute. We think because the Taliban learned of this and leaked false information that he was, in fact, a collaborator. Well, his arrival to safety in the United States was testimony to a little bipartisan cooperation, some people in the much-maligned faceless bureaucracy who went the extra mile, who administered a couple of polygraph tests to him, and within 3 hours after the end of the government shutdown, reissued the visa, and Janice and his family on their way to safety. Well, they woke up this morning in their own little apartment in Arlington to a new life. But thousands who risked their lives for Americans are still held hostage at risk themselves in Iraq and Afghanistan. Earlier this month, in the midst of all the chaos surrounding the government shutdown and the harsh rhetoric on the floor, we were able to keep alive the visa program for Iraqis. We brought it back to life after it expired September 30th. I would hope the same show of bipartisan support and bureaucratic activity, cooperation, and tenacity necessary to protect the visa program and to make it work in the case of Janice could be brought to bear to make sure that this program is extended for several years to allow escape to safety for other Iraqis in Afghanistan, that we can smooth the working of the agencies to expedite the granting of these visas from a trickle of a few dozen to the steady stream for the thousands whose lives are at risk because they helped Americans and they put their trust in us. I think it's important as the lives of these people and their families are, and keeping our word, there's also a larger lesson illustrating what can happen if we here in Congress are willing to work together. Yesterday, Leader Bob Michel harkened back to an earlier era of extraordinary cooperation and civility that he enjoyed with Speaker Tom Foley. Last night at the airport, I saw an example for this one family, alive and well and safe, of that same civility and cooperation. Who knows where that example might lead us next if we're willing to follow it. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Cook, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Monday, November 11th, will be Veterans Day. Veterans Day is very, very special to all Americans, but more so to me. I'm a veteran. Part of the reason I ran for Congress was I wanted to talk about veterans issues. I was concerned about the VA. I was concerned about the claims that have gone so long. I was concerned about particularly the Vietnam veterans that have their claims in a stack that haven't been addressed, and yet the clock is ticking. They're dying. You know, in 5 years, you know, some insurance person can probably tell you how many of those Vietnam veterans are going to be dead. And we have an obligation in this House as Americans to look after those that gave so much for our country, those that gave their lives, people in this House here that gave their limbs, that have been wounded, still carry shrapnel in their body, still have a cough and have NyQuil and wake up with a nightmare dreaming about a firefight in Hue or the DMZ or what have you. The memories never go away. And we have an obligation to all Americans because, quite frankly, we're going to have another war in the future. I hope it's not my lifetime, but there's always going to be a conflict, and we're going to call upon the military to do their job. And they will do their job. But it's our responsibility to make sure we take care of those men and women that have given so much for their country. Now, you know, many, many years ago in a place far, far away, you know, I was a platoon commander. Had a lot of young Marines, great troops. Many of them never came back. Lance Corporal Borey, Lance Corporal Duran. I can go on, and I'm not here to impress you with my memory because it's no great feat. It's something when you're there with those people and you saw what happened. You realize the significance of Veterans Day and how we can never forget those people that gave so much. So on that day that's coming up very, very shortly, if you see a veteran, if you see somebody in the military, just say to them, thank you, because you care and you also remember. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. McGovern, for 5 minutes. Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, a week ago Monday, October 21st, was the one-year anniversary of the death of my friend, Senator George McGovern of South Dakota. We shared the same last name, but we weren't related. I interned for him when I was in college, and he was in the United States Senate. And I embraced his liberalism. I admired his service to our country in World War II, where he served as a bomber pilot. And I respected very much his politics, the way he did politics, understanding the importance of reaching across the aisle, of working to build coalitions, to solve big problems. And in particular, I admired the work that he did to end hunger, working with people like Senator Bob Dole, a Republican from Kansas. He even worked with President Richard Nixon, who defeated him in the 1972 election, winning 49 states over Senator McGovern. But President Nixon held the first and only White House Conference on Food and Nutrition. That conference helped spur a whole bunch of legislative activity aimed at improving nutrition for everybody in this country and aimed at ending hunger, which was a problem. George McGovern and Bob Dole and even Richard Nixon believed that in the richest country in the history of the world, nobody ought to go hungry. And so I think of Senator McGovern often, especially now when I see what's happening in this Congress. On Friday, November 1st, a couple of days from now, the monies that were put into the SNAP program, formerly known as food stamps, to help provide additional resources for people to buy food in this country, those reinvestment monies will come to an end. There will be a $5 billion cut in the SNAP program on Friday. Every single beneficiary will see a reduction in their food benefit. That includes 22 million kids 9 million elderly people and disabled, and it includes 900,000 veterans. You know, we say we want to support our veterans, but many of them have come back and found it difficult to find a job, or found it difficult to find a job that pays a living wage, and they rely on the SNAP program so they can put food on the table for their families. And yet, on Friday, 900,000 veterans who are on the SNAP program will see a reduction in their benefit. A family of 3 will see a reduction of about $30 per month in their benefit. That's about 16 meals a month for a family of 3. Now, that is an awful thing that is about to happen. But what is more awful is what is coming down the road. This House of Representatives passed a farm bill that includes, on top of this $5 billion cut, an additional $40 billion in cuts in the SNAP program. That would mean 3.8 million people currently receiving the benefit will be thrown off the program. Hundreds of thousands of children who rely on the free breakfast and lunch program will lose that benefit. You know, I've been to many schools where I've seen kids staring off into space because they haven't had anything to eat. You can't learn if you're hungry. That $40 billion cut that this House of Representatives voted for would throw 170,000 veterans off the program entirely. And so today, we're going to have the first meeting of the Conference Committee on the Farm Bill, and I'm privileged enough to be one of the conferees. And I am going to tell my colleagues that I want very much for there to be a farm bill. I represent a lot of agriculture in Massachusetts. My farmers want a farm bill. Farmers all across the country want a farm bill. We need a farm bill for this country. And I'm willing to be flexible, and I'm willing to compromise, and I'm willing to accept things that maybe I don't like entirely, because that's the way you compromise. But what I'm not willing to do, and what every member of this House should not be willing to do, is to support a farm bill that makes hunger worse in this country. As we speak, there are 50 million Americans who are hungry. 50 million. 17 million are kids. We all should be ashamed. And who's to blame for this? We all share the blame. Because hunger is a political condition. We can solve this. We know what to do. We just don't have the political will. We kind of turn a blind eye to the problem of hunger in America. And it's a problem, by the way, that not only costs dearly in terms of human suffering, but it costs us all in terms of kids who can't learn in school and avoidable health care costs. We need a farm bill, Mr. Speaker, but let the price of that farm bill not be to increase hunger in America. Let's remember George McGovern. Let's remember Bob Dole. Let's remember people who understood the importance of combating hunger in America. With that, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman's time has expired. The chair recognizes the chair recognizes the gentlewoman from North Carolina, Ms. Fox, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The poem Impressions of a Pilot opens with the line, "Flight is freedom in its purest form." How perfectly that captures the allure of sky and space for so many who dream to conquer that frontier. Freedom and flight are inextricably linked. This past Saturday, many young North Carolinians got to experience that freedom in a brand new way at Davie County's Sugar Valley Airport. And what a joy it was to be there. A dedicated team of volunteers at the airport hosted the Spirit of Aviation, the next generation, to introduce local students to the many career and recreational opportunities available to them through aviation. Children and teens from local counties spent the day exploring aircraft, trying their hand at flight simulators, listening to aviation innovators, and even taking flight themselves in Young Eagle flight expeditions. Their faces were alight with excitement as they experimented with the physics of flight and felt the contagious enthusiasm of skilled aviators who, after years, still find freedom in the blue's high tide. The Spirit of Aviation Day at Sugar Valley revealed to young people new career possibilities for their lives and didn't just stroke the dream of aviation but presented a step-by-step path students might take to see aviation dreams become a reality. What stands out to me more than anything else is that this day of discovery and imagination was made possible by a community independently committed to encouraging the next generation of aerial pioneers, whether pilots, mechanics, or engineers. Yes, the spirit of volunteerism and community service is alive and well in North Carolina. In fact, it's thriving. And every time I'm home visiting nonprofits and meeting the people who make up their various support networks, I'm proud of the Tar Heel State. The initiative and benevolent entrepreneurialism displayed by Carolinians contributes new chapters often to the collective record of American service. The accomplishment of volunteers at the Sugar Valley Airport is just one example. In 2010, a group of North Carolinians came together through Winston-Salem's nonprofit Human Service Alliance and bought the Sugar Valley Airport. Their hope was that the airport would facilitate the promotion of aviation both as a sport and career field ripe with competitive jobs. In 3 short years, with a dedicated team of volunteers supplying 100% of the vision, manpower, support, and direction, the airport has come to serve as a hub for flight enthusiasts and learning center for those considering the pursuit of piloting or mechanic work. In any given week, the airport may host Boy Scout, Civil Air Patrol cadets, experimental aviation enthusiasts, leading women pilots, and aviation ground school students. North Carolinians take great pride in our first-in-flight distinction. It was on our Outer Banks that Wilbur and Orville Wright pushed the limits of gravity and completed history's first recorded control-powered airplane flights. With the commitment of the team at the Sugar Valley Airport, I can confidently say that our state, the home of Kitty Hawk, is intent on being the home of great aviators and pioneering aviation contributions for years to come. Guidance and encouragement from Sugar Valley's seasoned pilots, mechanics, and generous volunteers will continue to open a new world of opportunity to children in North Carolina. In this world above the clouds, our children are free to dream, free to soar, and free to conquer the wild blue yonder and much, much more. I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Washington, Mr. Heck, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, the Export-Import Bank transferred to the United States Treasury more than $1 billion. The Export-Import Bank does not draw on the U.S. Treasury. It contributes to it. The Export-Import Bank has never drawn on the U.S. Treasury. Instead, the Export-Import Bank does the following. It creates jobs. By independent assessment, more than 255,000 jobs are created by the bank, jobs that otherwise would not exist. The Export-Import Bank helps small businesses. Indeed, 87% of all transactions of the bank directly benefit small businesses. But I ask you not to take my word for it. I would invite each and every member of the House to go to the website and check the data about the number of transactions in their state, in their congressional district, and how that has helped to grow the economy. You know, the fact of the matter is that every single developed or developing nation in the world has some form of export assistance, be it direct loan guarantee or direct loans. If we were to discontinue ours, and theirs, by the way, are proportionately larger as a percent of GDP on average than ours is. If we were to discontinue it, it would be the equivalent of unilaterally disarming in an increasingly competitive global economy. So, one more time. Last week, the Export-Import Bank reduced our nation's deficit by more than $1 billion. The Export-Import Bank creates jobs. It helps small businesses. The Export-Import Bank makes America stronger. Thank you, Export-Import Bank. Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Schweikert, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I request the UC to revise.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, first I appreciate the House giving me these 5 minutes, though it's always dangerous when a member starts walking towards the microphone and they're doing it because something hit their desk and it annoyed them. And so we've been working on something in our office to try to explain an intense frustration I have, and that is I believe Washington and its embracing of delusional math. Look, I've only been here 3 years, and I've come to the conclusion that my single biggest problem I see is not the right-left continuum, but those that own calculators and those that don't, those that live in a world where math actually has a value. And this will make sense hopefully in a moment. I'm right now holding the CBO report, the 2013 long-term budget forecast. And in here, and yet I've not heard someone else come to this microphone, is just the beginning of a paragraph that should terrify you. Federal debt as a percentage of GDP in 2038 under the extended baseline is projected to be about twice as large as the amount estimated last year. You understand what this report is saying? That because of the policies from this administration, the policies coming out of our bureaucracies, and the things we need to actually deal with in this House, the numbers are almost twice as bad as it was last year. And for the speed that we're going to hit 100% of debt to GDP. And the thing you need to understand is it's worse than in the long-term budget outlook forecast, because there's delusions built into that, because we here as a body instruct Congressional Budget Office saying, follow current law. That's what you need to budget off of. How many of us here, come January, when the SGR is up, many of you will know it as DocFix, are going to hold the numbers, hold the current law, with the understanding at the end of about a dozen years, doctors who see Medicare patients are going to be paid 73% less. So we'll walk onto the floor here, probably December, January, and fix the SGR so doctors are compensated so they can continue to see their Medicare patients, and we blow up the numbers in the long-term budget forecast. And we do that on lots of things. So when you actually do the adjustment for math reality, policy reality, the long-term budget numbers are much, much worse than we talk about around here. And now to my point. A year and a half ago, we actually did something bipartisan. We did something called the Jobs Act. You know, it was, in the scale of things, it was small, but there were some neat things in there. And one of the things I'd fixated on was something called crowdfunding, an opportunity to help the truly little entrepreneur. This is only up to $1 million, and it was using this thing called the Internet to be able to raise money. So if you're the cupcake shop or the mechanic shop, or you have some idea where you're trying to begin getting some angel investment and get going. Well, the SEC took a year and a half to do what was supposed to be a simple rule set, so they're a year late. And here's what they brought us. This is the law. These handful of pages, 6, 7 pages, is the crowdfunding portion of the Jobs Act. Here's the 550-page proposed rule set. So if we're in a world where we have crushing debt screaming towards us, and some of that's becoming now because we're being told that the new normal is a 2% GDP growth, we need to be doing things that accelerate that economic growth, or we're in incredible trouble. So as House, bipartisan, we passed the Jobs Act, which is one of the little increments that is supposed to reach out and help grow the economy. And then the bureaucracy hands us crushing rules that make it almost impossible to use. So for whoever's listening, watching, caring about things like the crowdfunding rules that are before the SEC, you got 90 days now. Please go online, make comments, help them understand this is the supposed to be helping the next generation of small entrepreneurs in this country. And don't make it 550 pages of bureaucratic legalese. It can be simpler. We can handle this. We can do great things in this country. But we can't do it if the bureaucracy continues to crush our opportunities. Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
The gentleman's time has expired. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Florida, Ms. Wasserman Schultz, for 5 minutes. Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today as we close out the month to recognize October as Breast Cancer Awareness Month. Even as Congress has struggled with the basic task of funding our federal government, we are mindful that we have pressing problems and important work to do to raise awareness and help women survive this deadly disease. Over the past few decades, these public efforts have helped educate people and promote awareness about breast cancer. But we must remain vigilant in the fight because there is still so much more to be done. The statistics are sobering. 1 in 8 women will get breast cancer in her lifetime. This disease strikes women and some men of all backgrounds, races, ethnicities, and ages. While all women are at risk, many still think it can't happen to them, especially young women. But I know all too well that it can. In 2007, when I was just 41 years old, I learned I had breast cancer. While we've made significant advances on some fronts, recent studies show that more and more young women are being diagnosed with breast cancer and metastasis rates are not going down. I believe we have a responsibility as members of Congress to take Breast Cancer Awareness Month one step further and turn awareness into action. We must take action to implement the Affordable Care Act and continue to ensure that every single person in this country has access to the information they need to make informed decisions about their health. We must take action to ensure women get the preventative services and screenings they need while understanding their risks and treatment options. With this in mind, in 2009, I sponsored the Education and Awareness Requires Learning Young Act, or the EARLY Act. The EARLY Act focuses on equipping young women with the tools they need to take charge of their health. Currently, the Centers for Disease Control is developing evidence-based interventions and working with advocacy organizations on programs that provide support services for young breast cancer survivors and their families, as well as a national education and awareness campaign to help young women understand their risk and take charge of their health. Even with the CDC's work under the EARLY Act, we must do more to assist those women who survive breast cancer, and I'm developing new legislative efforts on this front, and we're working with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle. Young cancer survivors face very different life challenges than older survivors, from fertility preservation issues to the long-term health and neurocognitive effects of cancer treatments. With cancer care, one size does not fit all. The young face many more years as survivors and have unique challenges that arise that are not experienced by survivors who are diagnosed later in life. There was good news from the Supreme Court earlier this year when they took some action to help improve our ability to detect, diagnose, and treat breast cancer. This past June, the justices ruled unanimously that a company cannot patent naturally occurring genes. This decision paves the way for more companies to offer genetic tests for gene mutations that significantly increase the risks of developing diseases like breast or ovarian cancer. Thanks to this ruling, more women will have access to affordable testing and second opinion testing about their risks and courses of treatment. Like many others before me, when I was diagnosed with breast cancer and later identified as a BRCA2 gene mutation carrier, I had to make life-altering decisions without the benefit of a second opinion or even a second test. And that will now be a thing of the past, thanks to the Supreme Court decision. Again, though, there is still so much more to be done. We must work to guarantee that insurers, including programs like Medicare, cover testing where appropriate and preventative surgery where necessary. And there is still work left to be done to fully implement the Affordable Care Act. While implementation of any major change comes with great challenges, and we've certainly had some of those, it also comes with great reward. For example, I'm thrilled that this coming January, with the opening of the health insurance marketplaces, no woman will ever have to worry again about being dropped from her health coverage when battling breast cancer. Before the Affordable Care Act, too many Americans were just one diagnosis away from having to face cancer without affordable quality coverage that could not be taken away. A case in point is my friend Marianne Wassel of the Get in Touch Foundation. She wrote me a few weeks ago to say her life literally depends on the Affordable Care Act. Marianne is battling advanced breast cancer. She is currently on COBRA insurance, but when that runs out, she would surely be uninsurable without the Affordable Care Act. Marianne's chemotherapy treatment for the month of July alone was $110,000. Simply put, without coverage, she could not afford the treatment she needs. Her note to me said, and I quote, "This is real for me. It is life or death for me." This is why the Affordable Care Act is so important, for breast cancer warriors like Marianne. I've had so many women come up to me, Mr. Speaker, and confess that they haven't had a mammogram in years because before the Affordable Care Act, they could not afford the expensive copays and deductibles or feared the prohibitive costs of treatment. They were literally afraid to get a diagnosis because they were worried they couldn't afford treatment. That worry is a thing of the past. Education and awareness is only half the battle. For breast cancer or any serious disease, access to affordable quality health insurance is a necessity. It is not a privilege. It is a right for every American. Looking forward, we must work together to help women know their risks, discover cancer early, and access the best treatment possible. As we continue to learn more and help more young women, let us commemorate Breast Cancer Awareness Month with a renewed dedication to support our mothers, sisters, daughters, and sister friends. And together, let's eradicate breast cancer once and for all. Thank you. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman's time has expired. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Florida, Ms. Ross-Lehtinen, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to recognize the American Hellenic Institute, known as AHI. This year, AHI will be holding its 12th annual conference in my hometown of Miami. The conference provides an opportunity for the Greek American community to reflect on its role in American society and to advance and indeed strengthen U.S.-Greek relations. This will also include an awards banquet in which 2 members of the Miami area will be recognized for their service to the South Florida community and for promoting Hellenic ideals and values. This year's recipients of the Hellenic Heritage Public Service Awards are Gus Andy and John Haralambidis. John, who passed away sadly earlier this year, was the embodiment of all that AHI stands for. His legacy will forever live on through his deeds and through the school that he founded, the Archimedean Academy. I've had the privilege of being at that school, and I can account for its academic curriculum, which is simply outstanding. I congratulate the American Hellenic Institute, Gus Andy, and the family and friends of John for this important and meaningful recognition. Mr. Speaker, I would like to recognize and congratulate my good friend Tony Argies, who has been selected by the American Jewish Committee in South Florida to receive its 2013 National Human Relations Award. Tony has been an active member of our South Florida community for many years, so this honor is well deserved. He continues to play a vital role in enhancing and promoting the important relationship between the United States and Israel. This Human Relations Award is presented to leaders whose work within the community reflects the mission of the AJC, building bridges of understanding and promoting freedom and democracy throughout the world. As Tony Argies understands, in this dangerous time, we must stand together with our ally, the Democratic Jewish State of Israel, and continue to work together to preserve this oasis of freedom in a desert of oppression. Congratulations to Tony Argies and to the American Jewish Committee in South Florida. Mr. Speaker, involved citizens help our communities on important issues in order to raise awareness on human trafficking and help to put an end to domestic violence. Domestic violence and human trafficking are widespread human rights violations that continue to plague our world, cutting across racial lines, ethnic lines, geographic borders. As a wife, mother, grandmother, and a female member of Congress, I realize the profound responsibility that I have to work together with my congressional colleagues to pass legislation in a bipartisan manner that would speak to the very heart of each and every woman. As long as young girls and women across the globe continue to struggle to break through the shame and the silence that surrounds domestic violence and sexual trafficking, we must continue to put these issues on every national and global agenda. This year, Congress reauthorized the Trafficking Victims Protection Act and the Violence Against Women Act, two critical pieces of legislation to address the needs of these vulnerable members of our global society. I recently co-sponsored two important resolutions to raise awareness on the need to protect women from the horrible attacks that they face. I will soon introduce legislation to amend current U.S. law that unintentionally facilitates domestic violence by forcing the return of a child in international child abduction cases despite a recognized risk to the child or the parent. But the reality is, Mr. Speaker, that government alone cannot combat these horrendous crimes against girls and women. We need your help. As a community, we have the obligation to fight these crimes and protect girls and women from domestic violence and human trafficking. Awareness is key in stopping these human rights abuses. These crimes are on the rise, but together we can make a difference. We must make a difference. Be the difference today in your community. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Thompson, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, today I rise to discuss the Homeowners Flood Insurance Affordability Act, a bipartisan bill to delay further implementation of flood insurance rate increases that took effect on October 1, 2013 under the National Flood Insurance Program. Congress last year, on a bipartisan basis, passed the Flood Insurance Reform Act of 2012. The measure included long overdue reforms that strengthened the financial solvency and administrative efficiency of the National Flood Insurance Program. The rationale for the 2012 law was the need for the National Flood Insurance Program to more accurately reflect flood risk. Historically, most low-risk states subsidize higher-risk coastal states. Similarly, low-risk areas within states tended to subsidize those areas with higher risk, which were more prone to flooding. The linchpin of the 2012 law was to use true actuarial rates in order to prevent very low-risk areas from subsidizing moderate to high-risk areas. The unintended consequences has been drastic premium increases for those plans that were traditionally subsidized by the National Flood Insurance Program. Under the 2012 law, Congress mandated that the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, complete an affordability study to further evaluate any unintended consequences as a result of the changes. This study was to be completed before the rate increases went into effect, which was crucial to understanding the full scope of the new risk model. FEMA has failed to complete the affordability study that was required under the law. Additionally, it remains a huge concern that FEMA does not have the data it needs to accurately determine risk under this new policy regime, and is incapable of creating a new mapping system that truly reflects true actuarial rates. Now, while 80% of the policyholders will not see increases as a result of the new policy, a small portion of properties are being hit with staggering increases. This is a serious concern for communities and individuals across the country, including many from the 5th District of Pennsylvania, which I'm proud to represent. I joined yesterday with colleagues on both sides of the aisle as an original co-sponsor of the Homeowners Flood Insurance Affordability Act, legislation to delay for 2 years the higher rates brought on by the 2012 law until there's an affordability study completed by FEMA. The bill also makes structural changes at FEMA to assure that there's an advocate for homeowners when flood maps are drawn or adjusted. Mr. Speaker, improving the financial viability of the nation's flood insurance program while ensuring that the program protects those it was designed to support is something every member of Congress should support. Now, I encourage my colleagues to join in this common-sense effort to protect and improve our nation's flood insurance program by co-sponsoring the Homeowners Flood Insurance Affordability Act. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. Pursuant to Clause 12A, Rule 1, the Chair declares the House in recess until noon today.
So as you heard, the House will be back at noon Eastern today, about an hour from now. Lawmakers wrapping up work on the floor this week on a bill that would expand the ability of banks to use a type of financial derivative known as swaps to hedge risk. The House is also scheduled a final passage vote on a resolution disapproving of the debt limit increase passed by Congress on October 16th. The resolution currently has no chance of halting the increase since the Senate rejected the measure yesterday. Watch the House live right here on C-SPAN when members gavel back in, again at noon Eastern.